Hello everyone. In this lesson, we will introduce the fuel oil purifying system. The function of fuel oil purifying system is using the oil separator to make the fuel centrifugal purification and separation, which is in the settling tanks or storage tanks. Transfer the purified fuel to the service tanks. In order to obtain more pure fuel oil, to feed the equipment combustion. In the page of the purifying system, the dark side is a heavy oil pipelines. The light color side is a light oil lines. Number 1 oil separator is a heavy oil separator. Number 2 oil separator can be used as both a heavy oil separator and a light oil separator. The light oil separator can be used to separate heavy oil. It can also be used to separate the light oil. Take number 1 oil separator, for example. We introduce the oil separator related pipeline. There are 3 core pipes. The first one is its inlet of oil. The second line is the outlet line for the clean oil after separation. The third line is a bypass pipeline. This is a feed line of the oil separator. Through a filter and a feed pump and through a heater, transfer fuel into the oil separator. This is the outlet line of the oil separator, which can transport the purified fuel to the number 1 or number 2 service tank for heavy oil. The fuel oil in service tanks can be overflowed back to the settling tanks. So the separator can work in cycle. There's no need to worry about overflow of service tank. This is the bypass line of the oil separator. When it needs to control the amount of separation, the bypass pipe is necessary now. Fuel is not passed through the bypass 3-way valve. Can return oil directly. If we need less amount separation, we can adjust by opening the throttle valve. This 3-way valve is used to control fuel inlet or bypass. When the oil separator is not ready or during shutdown, it is necessary to keep the fuel in circulation. 3-way valve work in the bypass position, play a bypass oil function. So the 2 roads join together. Finally, they all went back to the settling tanks. The main source of the oil inlet line is 2 settling tanks. By opening the corresponding valves, fuel oil in the settling tank, the oil separator supply pump is transported to the oil separator. In addition, the fuel oil in the service tanks passes through the corresponding valves. It can also be fed into the oil separator. Normally, we separate and purify fuel in the settling tanks to the service tanks. If the fuel contains more impurities, the primary separation is not satisfactory. We can also recycle the fuel oil in the service tanks for separation and purification. So the 4 heavy oil tanks have valves to the oil separator and are fast closing valves. Fuel goes through the inlet filter, the oil separator supply pump, the oil separator heater, then through this line into the oil separator. This is the inlet side of the oil separator. The fuel oil is centrifuged and purified in the oil separator. The clean fuel is transported to the service tanks by the clean oil outlet. The bypass fuel is recycled back to the settling tank from the below line. This is the residue outlet line of the oil separator. The separator residue will eventually pass through the line back to the sludge tank. Above is a oil separator related pipeline. After understanding the relevant pipeline, we can separate the oil in tanks from each other. For example, we can choose fuel oil of number 1 settling tank. After being separated and purified by the oil separator, it can be driven into the number 1 heavy oil service tank. This is the most common case. A special case, we can also transport the heavy oil from the number 1 service tank to the oil separator. After separation and purification, it is transferred back to number 1 heavy fuel oil service tank, or number 2 heavy fuel oil service tank. This is in the service tanks for circulation purification. There are the heavy oil separation lines. So number 2 oil separator is similar. Also pay attention to the 3 core piping: fuel oil inlet pipeline, clean oil outlet pipeline, bypass return pipeline. As a number 2 heavy oil separator is a dual-use oil separator, so according to the actual purification of fuel quality to determine the specific pipeline. There are 3 important nodes to notice here. One is the entry node. When separating and purifying heavy oil, fuel comes from the heavy oil line on the left. It's the same as number 1 separator. Fuel oil can be selected from 4 heavy oil tanks and transported by the left side pipe after passing the filter. Through the number 2 oil separator supply pump, after heating by the heater, entering the oil separator. The other way when separating light oil, the oil comes from the 4 light oil tanks on the right. Let's introduce the specific pipeline. Under normal circumstances, it is to separate the light oil in the storage tanks, pass through relevant piping and valves, transport to the inlet node. Special cases can also be used to separate the light oil in a service oil tank. Then it goes through the filter and the supply pump, goes to the heater. When the oil separator separates the light oil, no need to go through a heater. So the fuel enters the separator from the bypass line. This is the inlet line. The other 2 nodes are junction of bypass line and net oil outlet line. There are 2 paths at each of these nodes. One way for heavy oil, another way for light oil. According to the type of fuel separated by the oil separator to determine. If heavy oil is separated, open the valve associated with heavy oil. The bypass pipeline is connected with a heavy oil settling tank. The clean oil line communicates with the heavy oil service tank. If light oil is separated, open the valve associated with light oil. But there's a slight difference about the bypass lines from heavy oil. Light oil return is delivered directly to the inlet of the oil pump. And the reason for that, there's only storage tank in light oil system, but no settling tank. So it is more convenient to directly transport back to the oil pump inlet. This is the difference between the number 2 separator and the heavy oil on the light oil bypass lines. In some ships' piping, a 3-way valve will also be installed in the bypass return oil pipeline. We can make artificial choices. Select transport back to the settling tank or the suction port of the feed pump. When the separation is light oil, the fuel is transferred to the light oil service tank after passing through the oil separator. One thing to note here is that separated light oil can only be returned to the service tank of diesel. Therefore, we need to pay special attention to the separation of light diesel. It's not like separating heavy oil. As circulating purification between service tanks, the separated and purified light diesel cannot be transferred back to the light diesel service tank. Similarly, the oil residue generated by the oil separator is returned to the oil residue tank through the oil residue pipeline. Dirty oil and oil residue in the sludge tank can be sent to the incinerator by oil sludge pump. It can also be left to dock for recycling on shore. That's a brief introduction to the fuel purifying system.